This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or Greek tragedy.
Could you imagine what was in the Library of Alexandria?
I bet it was porn.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
Thanks for joining us on Talking Hardcore. We're back 2 episodes in 2 weeks, which is good, getting back in the flow after a delayed kind of summer break.
Yep. Somebody likes fishing too much.
Yeah, let's blame me.
Yeah, we're gonna blame
me.
We're gonna blame George.
Yeah, it's definitely not you.
No,
for sure. There's no way it's you. I think it's Ace.
Yeah,
we're gonna blame Ace. He's been a little stingy with paying us for these episodes.
He's a slave driver.
Yeah, Ace. That's what he does. So anyway, thanks for joining us. Today is Punic Nightmares. Matt Bellah, author. Say hi, Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
He's kindly agreed to join us today, and we're going on an old school episode where we break down our thoughts on Dan Carlin's old school episodes. Today, we're talking about Punic Nightmares, which is a 3-part series, his first multi-part series.
Yep. Awesome, by the way.
Just freaking sweet. Okay. And this is one I've been looking forward to. Now, we talked about this a bit when we did Punic Nightmares trivia last year, which you guys can find in the old feed that's still there. We played Punic Nightmares trivia, and I can't remember who won. I think I can't remember.
No, I think Matt won.
I can't remember because he always won.
Yeah, Matt won.
Yeah, Matt won.
No, I won once.
Yeah, against me?
No, against Matt.
Oh, okay.
Didn't I win against you, Matt?
I don't think so.
I don't remember.
No, he's like, I have it written down right here. No, yeah, Matt, like, no little confusion.
Matt's got like a blackboard with like some chalk marks on it. You know, confirmed kills.
No, that's the desk screen. That's his desktop screen. Scott 0, Matt 3.
It's a notch in my microphone.
Nice, nice. Just takes out his pocket knife after every episode. Just awesome. Yeah. So we talked about a little bit of that then, and this is going to cover some of the same ground. But we thought Punic Wars or Punic Nightmares was so good that it deserved its own episode.
Well, plus we have to go chronologically through Dan's old works.
It's what we do.
Yeah. Well, partially what we do.
Yeah. Sometimes what we do. So Punic Nightmares. If you are just joining us and you haven't listened to those episodes, you can buy them from Dan's website at the link in the description. Hardcore History, dancarlin.com, excuse me. And like I said, link in the description. They are his first long series, historical long series podcast. Like up until that point, his episodes had all been like one-offs. They're starting to get a little longer. But this is the one where he really started to find his groove, and it started to morph into what it is now, which is, multiple parts about a topic in depth. That wasn't what he really did at the beginning. And so the subject of Punic Nightmares is, of course, the Punic Wars, which are the 3 wars between Rome and Carthage in the 200s BC, which are a fascinating subject and one that we wanted to get into. So if you haven't listened to those episodes, go ahead and listen to them, but we'll do a brief recap. Matt, you want to jump in first, or should I give a little bit of the detail?
I'll let you do the detail, at least on the first one, but before we start, I just want to ask you guys a question, if that's all right.
Shoot.
Yeah, there's no script.
Have you ever fought an elephant in hand-to-hand combat?
Well, what kind of man would have not done that? Of course I have.
Exactly.
That's what I do.
We did that last week.
I go to the zoo and I challenge those bastards.
Yep.
It's actually not hard now, Matt, because
So wait.
We have guns.
You fought an untrained elephant? That's not a fair fight.
Yeah, that's way better. Don't fight trained ones. That's silly.
With our bare hands, and we choked it out.
Listen, take every advantage you can get, right?
No, he said hand-to-hand combat.
Usually,
firearm.
So the way
that's
to take the elephant out in hand-to-hand combat, Matt,
Uh-huh.
is to trank it first. And then it's not that bad to slit his throat. Use a machete. You can't do it with a pocket knife. You do it with a machete to slit his throat.
You need an axe.
But then your village eats for a month.
Yeah.
You know, that's the benefit of whacking an elephant. Everybody eats.
Good call. So
Yeah.
that's actually a good lead-in. Take every advantage you can, because that is absolutely how Hannibal operated, was it not?
Hell yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so we'll get to Hannibal. That's pretty awesome.
Wait.
So, Punic Wars.
wait a minute.
Sorry.
Matt, when was the last time you fought an elephant hand to hand?
Look at Matt. An elephant would eat him in his trunk, just like suck him up and then shove him in his mouth. Matt's like,
I admittedly have never fought an elephant in hand-to-hand combat, but imagining what that's like is just a great way for Dan to bring you right into the battlefield, right into the conditions,
yes.
the terror, the circumstances, and he also says something in here which is like, at the drop of a hat, you're expected to become a mass murderer, and then just like get over it and go on with your life. You know?
Right, which again we're gonna get to that because I wanna get to the PTSD aspects of all this stuff when we get there.
Yeah, me too.
Let's do it quick.
I have to say one thing.
Sure.
The elephant, the medieval tank.
Well,
Oh, the first tank.
the ancient.
The ancient tank.
This isn't
Straight
medieval
up.
times. Here's the thing that you don't. Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
Let's make a note. Matt, can you make a note if you have a pen there? Just make a note. Elephants. I want to get back to that. I've got a thought here but I want to do this chronologically.
You're going to forget.
No, that's why Matt wrote down elephants, and that'll trigger me to remember what I was going to say.
Triggered.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay. So, the first Punic War, fought between Rome and Carthage, took place because of fighting on the island of Sicily with some Greek villages there and settlers there involving the
Carthaginians.
Well, okay. We should talk about the story there. There was the Mamertines,
Yep.
where there's mercenaries for a king on the island of Sicily. The king died, and these Mamertines didn't leave. Instead, they just killed all the dudes and then took their wives and families and lived in their houses and basically said, well, we're that guy now, which is a wild thing to do. And Dan is very... Imagine he said that's the kind of thing that could only happen in the ancient world. And nowadays I think, well, hopefully, hopefully.
Depends where you're at.
Yeah, hopefully. But that's a pretty crazy thing. So then the Mamertines are doing that, and the Carthaginians get invited to come try to help or asked to come try to help fight off the Mamertines. And the Romans get asked to come try to help fight off the Mamertines. And in the end, Rome and Carthage end up butting heads. And the long story short, in that first Punic War, which is the boring one, the Romans win, and they basically extract a pretty heavy-duty treaty from the Carthaginians. Think Treaty of Versailles, right? They made Carthage pay way more than they should have. They exacted a really heavy toll, which caused a lot of bitter feelings in the Carthaginians, which then led to the Second Punic War, which is the fun one. Right, we can all just agree,
Hannibal.
Of the three, if you only got to really get into one, that's the one.
Can I jump in right there on something?
Yeah. Please.
So there's a lot of great books about the history of Carthage, and there's one called Carthage Must Be Destroyed. It's the whole history of the Carthaginian people. It's really great.
I think you talked
and
about it
also,
before, yeah.
Yeah, and there's also an excellent Great Courses series about this.
Oh, cool.
So just revisiting that latter one today, Rome was a budding republic when Carthage signed a treaty with them. Carthage predates Rome as an empire or a civilization, as or whatever you want to call it. So Rome had just recently overthrown its last king when Carthage said, okay, we're going to lend these guys, we're going to make friends with you. Because
is that like 500 BC?
It was, well, yeah. So, but Carthage had been around for a long time before that, and they had colonies all around. So, excuse me. So Rome was very much budding in its infancy as a republic, and Carthage and they were friends. They were friends way back in the day. It was a good thing. So
very similar institutions too.
Yeah, and Carthage was praised for having a very interesting system of government, like the best in the world at the time, or at least the Western world, which is like elected magistrates, and then an aristocratic senate, which is like, yeah, and then there was a body of representative people. It was very interesting. But I mean, just speaking of the Syracuse incident that triggered all this, 3 huge wars that led to the destruction of Carthage as a civilization and all its colonies. They were friends once, you know what I mean? So this incident is actually really serious, and seeing it in that light, I kind of digging into the prehistory of this whole thing.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Right. So after the First Punic War, thank you, Matt. That's a great point. I didn't even remember that. After the First Punic War, the main general who ran that war who did well, the only general for Carthage who did well during the First Punic War was Hamilcar Barca, and he had 3 sons, one of which being Hannibal,
Hasdrubal,
and Mago, right?
Yep.
So, but Hannibal, the famous Hannibal, who hates Rome his whole life and leads an army, including elephants, over the Alps into Italy, where he proceeds to kick with the Roman's ass for 17 years.
I was going to say 20, but
yeah, I think it was close to that, right? And the only way Rome ends up ever actually winning the battle is to get Hannibal out of Italy by attacking Carthage, so that Hannibal has to go back to save Carthage, and that's how they end up defeating Hannibal.
Well, there's a little more
way more to it, right? And we're going to get into that a little bit, but that's the broad strokes.
Okay,
that's the fun war where you have Hannibal running around Italy, just destroying Italian armies, Roman armies.
Yep,
3 in 3 years, they lose everybody,
which is unheard of.
The Battle of Cannae,
Lake Trasimene,
and Trebia before that.
And Trebia. So Trebia is the first one, or Cannae is the first one?
No, Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae. And there was actually a smaller battle in between Trasimene and Cannae that's not really talked about in Dan's episodes. You know,
right. We're saying Cannae.
Yeah, Cannae. Yeah.
I was going to say you killed Kenny.
You bastards!
But the big. So Hannibal comes out of the Alps. Half his army died while crossing the Alps.
Not only that, he's also fighting
Celtic
natives like in the Alps as well.
Sure. And his elephants falling off cliffs and all that.
And people.
Yeah. Okay, so Matt, remember when I asked you to make a note about elephants? Here's one that I found fascinating.
Cool.
Not just those elephants were roaming around Spain first, because that's where Hannibal's army was. They were in Spain. That's the Carthage headquarters. They're just roaming around Spain with elephants, which is bananas to me. Like there was some Celtic guy that was like, Celtic guy that when the elephants left, he was telling his buddy, and his buddy's like, no way. Wouldn't believe him. He's like, no, I swear there was these dudes riding these giant beasts. It was all gray, and it had this nose, that thing. It was crazy. And they're like, how many mushrooms did you eat?
Yeah, that didn't happen. But
you crazy.
That plays into something that is a great prequel to Crossing the Alps, because there was a skirmish before that, scouts against scouts. But really, over the Alps, let's start there. So yeah, elephants. So like, I was listening to that Great Courses series today, and the host is the professor. She was talking about how Hannibal's passage over the Alps was depicted in mythological terms. That was how great of an achievement it was back then. And then she fast forwards to Napoleon, who did the same thing, came down, won a victory, and even in Europe at that time, it was depicted as incredibly fantastic. And just imagine what it was like, like nearly 2,000 years, about 2,000 years before that. So she makes the point to say that these were not gods who came down from the mountains. They were bedraggled, tired, hungry, weary, wounded, exhausted men. But it was his achievement was depicted as in mythological terms, as if he himself was a god, because that's the only way people could really associate with it, and seemingly the only type of being who was capable of accomplishing such a feat.
Right, but he lost like 24,000 men out of his
He did. He
50,000 men.
really did. He
Like,
did. He
and
took a
they-
heavy
I
hit,
mean,
which
those
is why,
guys killed,
and he was fighting the Celts along the way because there was mountain tribes who were
living in the Alps.
harrying them. But when he got down, he recruited massive numbers to his side, who some of whom even defected from the Romans because they were like, "This dude is going to help us." And to be clear, this was like going in to invade a country as a liberator. You know what I mean? Very apropos of like goes to the Ostfront. We're like,
The
hey,
Romans were evil.
Right. We're actually going to liberate your country and then leave, which was his plan, and probably would have done. Who knows? Maybe the Carthaginian government would have said, you know what, let's just take Rome, but stay there. But Hannibal's plan was to liberate the allied cities from Roman control and then leave, to rewind the film or set back the clock.
Basically make Rome weak, but not destroy it.
So these tribes saw that, and they actually went over to his side. And these troops, who he recruited, stayed with him in enemy territory for 16 years.
Right. But a lot of them didn't go over, not as many as he thought, right? He was thinking he would get a higher percentage than he ended up getting.
Yeah,
of the Celtics.
But another thing that fascinated me is that Celtic tribes and people like that we talk about like unit fighters versus individual fighters, and these were very much individual fighters who had to be trained as a unit. You know what I mean? So not only was he able to recruit them, but able to train them to fight in formation effectively
and use them effectively. Because not only did you train them, but you had to recognize what they were good at and put them in the right situations to do what they were good at.
And that kind of fast forwards to Cannae a little bit, but
Hannibal was a genius, like probably one of the best generals of all time.
Who made one mistake?
Yeah, really, that's pretty crazy though.
But the one mistake was he should have attacked Rome.
Yeah,
no, I don't. I actually don't agree. I don't agree with. Well, we can get into that.
It could go either way.
Definitely get into that.
What we know in hindsight is he should have, right?
Really?
The benefit of hindsight is we know that it didn't work out for him. So he would have been worth trying.
It might not have worked out.
I don't know that you could say that it was the wrong thing to do.
It might and it might not have worked out for him a lot sooner had he done so.
Right. So let's give the context. Let's give the context. So
I'm gonna make a note of that for the end of it there, and
sure,
and we can get back.
But I think that's a fascinating thing. I just want to give people the context so they know what we're talking about. So 3 years straight, Hannibal beats and destroys a whole Roman army.
Yep, legions.
Yep, right. So Matt, which was the first one right when he came out, almost pretty quick after he got out of the Alps. He recruited some Celts, and then he was the battle.
Trebia.
The Trivia
Right.
was that the first
the Battle
one?
of Trebia. There's a river, So
and he beats them. Go ahead.
So this is a double consular army, as I recall, and I know for a fact that a double consular army doesn't mean there's two So a consul was the Roman president, and when they send a consul into the field, it's what's called a consular army. It's his allotment of troops. Okay. So a double consular army was 2 legions, so about 10,000 men with cavalry and auxiliaries. Okay, so Hannibal is facing a double consular army, and now I want to zoom out here because the Punic Nightmares is the first time Dan really talks about Rome.
Yeah.
And if all you're doing, looking in the rearview mirror as a lot of people might be, who are listening to a podcast about hardcore history, they might be familiar with his entire body of work by now, or most of it. Then you know that he talks about Rome a lot more and in much more detail. But this is the time he really first gets into their attitude.
2008.
Yeah. So there's the first time he talks about their attitude, which is like, we're not defeated. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we just lost an army. So so that plays into this a lot. And he also gets into like what ancient battles looked like. And in Trebia, he dives into this. He gives you the gore. He quotes from the Iliad. And even though the Iliad was written like hundreds of years after the events that it's supposedly talking about,
Still like 500 years before this.
Right. Yeah. And they didn't. Well, I'm just saying that like the Iliad was written hundreds of years after the events that it supposedly depicted, when they had lost knowledge of like how chariots worked in battle. So they just had people like showing up to them and being dropped off when in fact they were probably used differently. One thing they probably had no problem remembering was what people looked like dying in battle. So like those descriptions Dan gives, are very probably accurate and representative of the time. And so another thing about Trebia is like, okay, so obviously Cannae is the master stroke. It's the big one, right? Dan says it right. Cannae is the master stroke. It's the hugest thing of his career. It's still studied today. General Norman Schwarzkopf was purported to have used it in Operation Desert Storm. Like,
right.
It's a huge
so
thing.
Cannae was the third battle out of these three, right?
Right. And we can get into the details of that later, but it's hard to pick
the
a
famous
favorite
double envelopment, right?
It is of a greater force. But so it's hard to pick a favorite battle of Hannibal's. But if I had to pick one, other than Cannae for its glamour, for its spectacle, I'd say Trebia, and for the following reason: it's because it incorporates the most factors of which Hannibal took advantage at the time. He was a master of not only like the environment, meaning the landscape, using the ground well, but the circumstances of the day of the battle, and also getting into your enemy's head and using his mentality against him. So you had an anxious consul who wanted to pick a fight, who wanted to get into a fight. He had a river between you. He provoked a battle. He made the Romans get up early, not eat breakfast, cross a river in the cold, and now he has all these advantages. He also had hidden troops nearby. He used the land. It's this. It's this advantage upon advantage upon advantage. It's his first battle.
All those little things add up.
Yeah, they really did. It's his first test, and he absolutely just used every minutia to his advantage. And absolutely, it's fascinating to me for that reason.
I agree.
Well, and I was going to call them force multipliers. I mean, it's just like, you're just being buffed. Right, so your troops are fed, they're warm.
You nerd.
What? Stop it! I mean, your troops are fed, warm, and they're ready. Right now, the Romans on the other side had all the other things. They're not going to have any energy. They're cold.
Home court advantage, though.
Yeah, well, the home court advantage, but
that's right. But that's how he mitigated against that home court advantage.
Exactly.
Was by taking every little advantage you could, and you add up to winning the battle.
Well, I mean,
that's what he was. He was
being cold. First of all, sucks.
Sure.
And then be on an empty stomach and having to go fight. Like, dude, you're gonna run it. You're gonna run out of gas quick, right?
Yep.
I mean, you need to have,
especially in ancient warfare.
Sure.
Where you're swinging heavy swords. You're not just holding a gun and shooting bullets.
Yeah, but you're
swinging heavy swords.
I don't think they were as heavy as you think they.
But they're heavier than just putting a gun to your shoulder and pulling a trigger.
A long sword
more
weighs
energy.
A medieval long sword weighs about 2.5 pounds, and a bronze short sword, like a falchion, like they were using kind of back then, probably weighed a little bit less than that. But think of the shield; that's way heavier.
And the armor.
Yep.
That literally, you need to be taking in food to have the energy to sustain that.
Yep.
Because adrenaline wears off after a while.
For sure. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, that's a fascinating point, though, Matt. I like that. Trebia is a great battle.
But Trasimene wasn't the same thing with Trasimene. He forced the troops into the water until the point where they
he did.
I mean, he forced the Roman legions into the water.
Oh, he's a great general.
To the point where you couldn't even fight.
So the Romans were moving from one area to another, and they were moving along basically a narrow path with a lake on one side and a hill on the other, a wooded hill in the fog. And he hid like 50,000 troops in these woods and just rushed them before they even knew what was happening. And they were drowning themselves in the water rather than. That's using the landscape and the circumstances.
Yep.
It just doesn't add up as much as Trebia for me, and I appreciate all of his tactics, but I mean, the previous one is just for all the conditions, the green troops, like everything, like that is the big one for me. And Trasimene should not be overlooked at all.
Well, then Cannae is the real crown.
So now Rome is like, okay, we got to steal this guy.
Matt, let's get us there though, timeline wise. Okay, so he comes in, he destroys the Roman army, and then starts trying to go around the countryside building up more Italian forces to get on his side. They come back with another army. He destroys that army. They come back with another army. And he destroys them at the Battle of Cannae, which is the famous double envelopment where he put his best troops on the edges instead of in the middle and told the middle guys to just kind of like back up slowly.
Yeah.
In the rear. Yeah. Let them back up slowly so that his good troops on the outside would slowly encircle them. And it ended with the Roman army in a complete envelopment, which means they were surrounded on all sides by the Carthaginians, who were actually the lesser force, and the Romans were just waiting there to die.
They didn't even have room to move, swing their swords.
And some of them were burying their head in their hands trying to suffocate themselves.
Yeah, or they did.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that would work.
Well,
I don't honestly think you can bury your head in the sand to suffocate yourself, though. I don't think that would work. I don't know. But
I'd rather be suffocated than stabbed to death. So
yeah, I know. I just don't think it would work.
Dan describes it as tactical judo, and he used it. So this was there were 4 consuls in the field, 4 Roman consuls in the field at Cannae. So there was always 2 consuls in Rome. The president and the vice president went to battle. Okay, now there were 2 former consuls there too. Like one of them was like leading the cavalry, I think. So first, Hannibal had to clear the field of the cavalry, so he had his brother leading the cavalry, the Numidian cavalry, which swept the
pause for a second, Matt. 1 second. I just want to. So it's like if we went to war and leading our soldiers were Joe Biden, Donald Trump, George Bush, and Kamala Harris.
Yeah. So that's actually
it's
something
just
I wanted
bananas.
to talk.
That's just bananas.
I wanted to talk to you about that sometime during this, and it's a good place to get into it. Like, all Roman military commanders or politicians were like, if you wanted to be in the Senate, if you really wanted to be consul, you had to have military experience because you were sending troops into battle. What do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about
that? Not just military experience. You had to. Then once you were sending the troops into battle, you were going with them, and you were leading them, and you had the chance to die. I mean, Caesar almost died a bunch of times. Like, you had that chance to die while you were leading these armies.
Matt, that's a great question, and I don't think that's a bad idea. I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Sure.
I mean, look at, and I'm not even going to go there.
But the civilian control of the military is an important concept.
Sure. But if they don't know what it's like.
Right. But the fact that they're civilians is a big deal.
Sure. But they don't know what it's like.
But most presidents had served until recently.
Sure.
I think if we did the math here, I mean, the vast majority of presidents have served in the armed forces in the United States.
Sure.
The vast majority.
I think that if you are going to send troops into battle, you have to know what it's like.
Would that start with Clinton? Clinton didn't serve.
Right. That's probably, before that, I think they did. I have to look at LBJ, but I know JFK did.
Oh, yeah, for sure. JFK.
I think Nixon. Most of those people did. It was one way that was seen as you had to do that if you were going to be in politics and you wanted to get to the highest level.
Yeah.
Nowadays, most presidents are lawyers.
And that's a problem. You know what? We really need.
Founding fathers. A lot of those people were lawyers too,
and historians, and
they were lawyers
and farmers, and there's a lot. There's a
lot more of them were lawyers than probably almost any other profession besides farmers.
Well,
that'd be my guess.
Okay, I just asked ChatGPT, what is the ratio of U.S. presidents who have served in the military than not served?
I love this.
As of 2024, out of the 46 individuals who have served as president of the United States, from George Washington to Joe Biden, 31 have had military experience.
Yeah,
75%, roughly.
That's a majority.
Yeah.
This includes service in the U.S. Army, Navy, or other military branches, whether in active combat or reserve. And to be clear, George Bush was like, what was he, Air National Guard? So, whatever. But it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Service is service.
It can be. There wasn't always wars.
Sure.
Right.
Right. There wasn't always
you're
wars.
Still in that culture, and you have friends who die or suffer because of that. And you understand the sacrifice. You understand the cost.
Yeah, there's a truth to that.
So back in the canny, like you described the battle fairly well, and I'll just give a breakdown. So Rome was done messing around. Okay, they're like 2 armies defeated. Any other country in the world would have been like, we're done. Okay, thank you. But not maybe the Western world. Okay,
they would have came up with a treaty where they had to give a bunch of money to Carthage. Yep. Hannibal would have went home, and it would have been over.
But the Romans refused to admit they were defeated, so they raised a super army, 80,000 troops, and 70, 80,000, and they lined them up in this big block, the standard formation, but just going back and back for miles and miles, right? So Hannibal sees this and he knows what to do. He first of all, he lines his troops in a big arc, like the outside of a circle, a semicircle, and he puts the weakest troops in the middle, and then his stronger troops on the sides, and in the rear, kind of in position to be ready to move around to the sides and envelop them, are his African troops, his tried and true guys from back home. So there's the cavalry too. The Romans have cavalry, and then the Carthaginians have Numidian cavalry, which were elite. And so the first thing he does is have his brother I think his brother was leading the cavalry. So he has his cavalry sweep the Roman cavalry off the field, and then it's just down to the troops on the ground. Now they're pressing forward, punching. Okay. At this point, I want to stop because there's this fun anecdote that's not in Dan's episode that I know from reading his biography. May I tell it?
Sure. Yeah.
So what Dan does say is that Hannibal stood in the front lines of the outside of that arc.
Wow.
To show that you are not disposable. There is a plan here. I got your back. You're not just fodder. Okay. This is all meaning something.
Don't rout.
Right. So don't just turn around and run away. Slowly give ground. Okay. So we can imagine this as a frenzy of stabbing. But what they're doing, what the Carthaginian troops were doing, the Hannibal allied troops, were like blocking and stepping by, So Hannibal is standing in the front line, facing this massive Roman super army that has never, rarely, if ever, been assembled on the field of battle.
Right.
And standing next to him is one of his generals, a man named Gisco. All right, is a Carthaginian general. All right, and or one of his generals named Gisco. And Gisco is, let's call it concerned. Okay. So he looks at this unprecedented, huge, can you imagine it, army in front of you? And he says, look at all those men. And Hannibal turns to him and says, you know what? Yeah, there's a lot of people out there. But in all those ranks of soldiers, there is not a single man named Gisco. and that bucked him right up. That turned his fear into confidence. It said, yeah, there's all these mass-produced soldiers out there, but what makes me unique will serve me well in this fight. That's charismatic. That's leadership, man.
I mean, clearly he had to be a great leader.
Yeah.
Besides just being a genius. Okay, so Battle Cannae. They win. They slaughter up to 80,000 Romans in one day. Nobody left alive.
It was about 50,000 because about 30,000 escaped. And let's jump in here to the PTSD aspect of this, because Dan talks about this, the people who would survive that trauma. There's actually a great book called The Ghosts of Cannae that's about the survivors of that battle and how they trickled back into the surrounding towns.
Right, you told us about this at the trivia episode. You're right. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, they survived in the wilderness, made it back to some outpost or town, or eventually back to Rome, and then later
they were shamed.
Yep. Well, they got defeated and they survived, and that was all you could do. Yeah, but they were recruited into Scipio Africanus's army that went back to Africa and eventually defeated Hannibal.
They avenged themselves.
That's right. And Dan talks about PTSD. So this is the ancient world. I've never been on BetterHelp, that internet mental health site, you know what I mean? Where you talk to a therapist.
That sponsor all the podcasts.
Right.
But all the podcasts I listen to are and we're brought to you by BetterHealth.
Right. But even
how much money are these people spending? Anyway, go ahead.
But even without that
okay.
All right. So we're after Cannae and PTSD.
Okay. So what I was saying, sorry for the interruption. We had to edit out. We had some bad mic issues. I had to reboot my mic. PTSD, low stress for long sustained periods of time with loud noises and bangs and percussions seem to be worse for human psyche than short-term high stress situations because we kind of evolved for that.
Yeah.
That fight or flight.
Huh.
Right. And then you get it and
That's
you're done.
interesting. That's interesting.
Think about it, right? When you're taking on a lion, the adrenaline kicks in, you fight the lion with your friends, and then the lion leaves and you're fine.
Yeah.
Or you die.
Or the lion dies.
But you don't really get PTSD from that. So I wonder how much PTSD these people had from these ancient battles. It might have been a lot. And then did they just go to their local medicine man and get some mushrooms and then they were fine?
Well, you probably had some. I mean, maybe you had like flashbacks.
I'm sure they had.
Maybe you had flashbacks of like scenes.
Well,
but your mind, like I just don't think you didn't. You were like it was like you said. It's super high stress. I mean, look at World War I.
Not just high stress. You're fighting alongside your best relatives and friends, which is completely different than
But Dan talked about
modern warfare.
Dan talked about that in a couple other episodes as well.
Right.
But what he really talked about it in Blueprint of Armageddon, Blueprint for Armageddon, where guys were getting shell shock. Right.
Yes.
So where and I couldn't even imagine being in a trench and like slow artillery shelling was like a drum roll,
months on end.
Yeah, for months. I mean, and people were losing their mind.
That's what I'm saying. That's designed to cause more stress. Just by the nature of it, that's something that humans didn't evolve to handle. Right. So I think it would cause more PTSD than an ancient battle, which seems like it might be worse. In theory, an ancient battle is worse because you're literally hacking at people with knives.
Sure.
Right. And that's terrifying. But like that's more close to what we evolved to do than artillery shelling.
Yeah.
And it was that, remember, we talked about this from that Navy SEAL or Delta Ranger that Rogan had on. That talked about how there's less cases of PTSD in the special ops. And his theory was because they play offense.
Yeah.
They're not sitting around getting shelled. They're not sitting
shot at.
getting shot out slowly. Just long-term stress for sure. Low-level stress, long-term for long periods of time. They play offense, so they get to take the fight to the enemy, and that's less likely to cause PTSD, in his opinion. And it just, to me, that makes sense.
Well, and it's high stress for short periods of time.
Right.
You suffer a traumatic experience, and I think talking about it with your comrades afterwards is helpful processing it. And when I remember what you're talking about there with the SEAL guy, and it's like Sebastian Younger wrote about that in Tribe. It's like you suffer trauma as a group, and you process it as a group, and when you're separated from that group, that's when a lot of stuff happens. And then also like being less of a victim is very important too. Yeah, taking the initiative in that situation, feeling you have some kind of control over it. So you're in a battle. You go from being a farmer, maybe a trained soldier, you're a conscript. Nobody in the Roman legions was untrained. So let's just go through that. So
the old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
Well, here's one thing I do want to say about that real quick. There was this push to have people who went through these traumatic experiences try to talk about it.
And it made it
right
worse.
away.
Yeah.
So there's new studies that show like the best thing you could do for like a soldier that just had to shoot somebody or a cop that had to shoot somebody or something is honestly for a while, let them play video games and turn their brain off.
Wow.
Because what that does is that allows time. And this was in that memory book I was telling you about that I read. I read a book about memory. And what that does is that gives your brain time to let the memories become less vivid. Okay, so that when you do think about them, it won't be as traumatic. If you go do it right away, it gets the memories more seared into your brain. It makes things more traumatic. So if you go through something traumatic, that human impulse to try to not think about it is actually healthy. Right? So forcing that issue, most places try not to do that anymore. Like they were doing that with cops, right? When they had a shooting, or something like that, they would try to talk about it, have them talk to a therapist right away.
Yeah.
And that's actually worse. Just based on the way human memory works, which I found fascinating. I'll put a link in the description if I can remember this to that memory book. I think I talked about it with you, Matt. It is So
Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah,
this neurologist who studied human memory using MRIs and all kinds of cool stuff wrote a book that's for the common people, and it's freaking fascinating. But anyway,
I think the purpose of why you're fighting also or suffering that trauma also has something to do with it. We're like,
hell yeah.
Like, are you liberating someone and I had to kill someone to do that? Okay, I could justify it to myself this way. I was just following orders. That's going to be a different kind of thing.
Right, and that's why I think the worst PTSD comes when you're stuck on defense in those traumatic situations where it's different. Like if you have to go take a life of somebody because they're threatening because your government tells you to, or because they're threatening your family, or because of any number of reasons, like you said, that's a justification. But if you're just sitting there getting shelled, it can cause you to go insane.
Yeah.
And
I wonder how much they used mushrooms too.
Well, what I find interesting is, and this has changed military doctrines change. So, if you look at the troops on the front line during World War I or World War II, they would fight for so long and then they would get a break. But now we have, troops deployed for 9 months or a year. That's another thing that's an issue is, your deployments are steadily increasing in duration, at least for the U.S. military. So I was just curious.
Yeah, and Roman legionaries signed up for I think 16, if not 20 years. So like it was like 18 or 20 years. So that is a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a little different though, because it's not like Roman legionaries were fighting, constantly day in and day out.
Dan talks about this in the episode too. It's like in modern combat, you're kind of in danger all the time, which, as George pointed out, has been kind of showed to be more stressful. Whereas in the ancient world, it was like big fight, wait for maybe till next year, next campaign season, the summer, big fight, wait. You know what I mean? So it's different.
And don't forget, you also had some little creature comforts when you were in the Roman Legion. Because you were building forts and you were building, you were building up like,
and you had prostitutes following you around.
Yeah, and then the food train. Don't worry, but I'm just saying.
Okay.
Anyway,
all right, Battle of Cannae. Yeah, we're done with that.
All right.
After the Battle of Cannae,
there's a point directly after the Battle of Cannae that I find absolutely fascinating, and unless he wanted to have something specific to say,
well, that's I think that's where we're at. Are you talking about when Hannibal makes the decision whether or not to go to Rome?
Yeah, actually, okay, you're right. That's a finer point. Let's get into that first. Go ahead.
Oh, you go first.
So there was a lot of debate about whether or not he should have immediately attacked Rome. Okay, so what did he have? He had a bunch of exhausted troops. He'd lost a lot of guys too. He didn't just kill a lot of people. He lost a lot of people. He was not experienced at siege warfare. He had won all of his battles in open fields. Rome was a huge city. Okay, it would have taken him a while to get there. They would have pulled together another couple legions. The allies hadn't broken yet. He needed supply along the way. He didn't have siege weaponry. It probably would have been a debacle.
I would argue it might have been.
He could have in his defense though, he could have also sat outside of Rome, just like the Romans end up doing with Carthage, and just hanging out. And
then all of Rome's allies would have sent armies to hit him from 5 points, maybe. Instead,
that's why we Monday morning quarterback this, Matt.
Which I think is actually the correct strategy. Doesn't matter that it failed.
Right.
Against the Roman superior.
My default is
which is attacking the Roman system of alliance. Right, that was what really held Rome together.
My default is he's a genius. He probably knew what he was doing. He took a gamble. It didn't work. So we don't know if he went the other way, if it worked or not. But I always, think, he has better information than we did.
His previous siege lasted 8 months. I mean, imagine sitting outside of what would have happened. Like they had plenty of time to draw together.
Rome out.
Who knows?
He didn't have enough a large enough army to surround Rome.
Remember, they were arming their slaves with shields that were hanging on the wall from antiques.
Yeah.
Right, legit. Maybe if he's fast enough and he steals a march and he gets there, maybe they just take Rome without a siege. We'll never know. It might have been a mistake. All we know is what he did do didn't work, because in the end he lost the war. So he spent the next 16 or 15 years.
Why didn't it work though? Why did he lose the war? Let's jump way ahead and we'll come back. There's something.
No,
I want to
I
get back
think
to,
that's
but
where we're at now. I think that's where we're at.
It didn't. No, there's something. That's another fun thing I want to talk about. But it didn't work because of what I consider to be an obvious strategic move on the part of Rome, which is attacking, as you said, Carthage's headquarters in Spain. Okay, that was sitting there the entire time where they were so bungled up in Italy with, oh my God, this Hannibal guy is here. We got to fight him here. No,
right.
Go attack him there. He's not getting any support from the actual Carthage in North Africa. So they're going to be like, we are having a greater situation here. We are pulling you out of there. That could have happened at any time. So Hannibal besieges Rome. Rome just, has other people they can send up to attack. Yeah, they have other people they can send up to attack their colony. The whole situation happens anyways, and Hannibal is now stuck outside of Rome, easy pickings. So that could have happened all that time.
Well, and then they deployed the Fabian strategy, which was from the Council of Fabian, which was
that was well before. That was well before this. Well before this.
Well, no, but I'm saying they did that for the 15 years.
Yeah, right. They just delay him.
That's how they delayed it.
Yeah, they're attacking. They're attacking Hannibal's homeland.
Well, not only that, remember what else they were doing is they were attacking Italian allies that had defected to Hannibal. They attacked those cities, so Hannibal had to come defend them. So they were attacking their old allies who defected, and then leaving when Hannibal's troops showed up. Just like totally cat and mouse game, genius strategy. Genius strategy. Like honestly, Fabian strategy is kind of looked down upon by people, but man, what a freaking genius that was. Well, how do you beat the guy who can't beat him? You don't fight him. Well, you don't fight him.
It's stymieing him. Yeah. So that brings me exactly into something I've always wanted to talk about. And let me just set the scene here.
Can I?
So Hannibal.
One second, Matt. Scott's got to say something.
I was just going to say,
please do.
It's much like what the U.S. Navy was doing in the Pacific War against the Japanese. The Japanese were expecting us to go and take every little island.
So you're talking about island hopping?
Yeah, they're expecting us to island hop to take everything, and instead, what we did was we went straight to Japan instead.
No.
I mean, we skipped a bunch of islands. Straight to Japan, but it was called letting them.
They were expecting us to fight over everyone.
Correct.
Yeah, and we only hit the strategic ones.
Exactly.
Cut them off for supplies.
If that's not Fabian strategy, I don't know what is.
It's different.
It's pretty similar.
As maybe a little bit, but it's
we lost a lot of guys fighting in the Pacific and in the island hopping, whereas Fabian was losing.
The difference was the reason they didn't fight Hannibal is because they couldn't beat Hannibal because he was a genius.
Yeah. And the reason why we didn't fight all the time
was just because it would have been a lot of manpower.
Yeah,
that's
why there was no point in taking. He's not getting support from his government.
Strategically smart,
and so So Fabian was.
Go ahead, Matt.
So after Cannae, Hannibal is the great victor. Okay, he has defeated not one, but not two, but three Roman armies in the field. The last being a mega super army. Okay, now's the time to start tipping the scales and employing his strategy, which I think is smart. Of removing Rome. He's sticking to the plan. He's removing Rome's ally system from which they draw troops. Maybe after that he could besiege him. Whatever.
He's thinking, now that I've defeated all these armies, they will defect. I can get these Italian allies to defect.
And one city, at least one major city, did. Syracuse. The home of Archimedes, the brilliant genius. We'll talk about him in a minute. But there's this moment after his great victory when he was received by the governorship of Syracuse. And I love to imagine that moment in history. Hannibal, coming from this great victory, sailing on his ship to the port of Syracuse, or however he got there, being received like
ship, right? It's an island,
being received like a king.
Sure.
And he's done the impossible. He's defeated Rome again and again and again, and this last victory was just godlike.
It must have felt to them like the fall of Rome was inevitable.
Yeah, and he's sitting down at the table with this guy, and he's like, "You're the man." That is just this huge moment in history. I love the picture. It didn't last long, but that was good.
Like 15 years, yeah. So
he was fighting the whole time. He was playing that cat
fighting the whole time, but he was running around Rome, stomping out rebellions, or not rebellions, fighting to keep the Italian allies that defected and defending them from Roman attack. And meanwhile, Rome goes to Spain and wins. Scipio the first, I believe, goes to Spain and wins.
Oh, not the.
Is that the second?
Yeah. So and the Syracuse had Archimedes, who was like a brilliant mathematician. He designed all
Right.
these machines to fight the Roman ships and stuff like that. And then like after that, after the battle they wanted to seize him. And that brings me to something like I like to think about history. Like
Mhm.
there's been technologies throughout history when you needed to capture the one guy who knew how to make them. Like in the Dark
Right.
Ages,
Fascinating.
you go in there and get the iron worker because they're the only person who knows how to make iron weapons. And here it was Archimedes. And that brings us forward to the Second World War again, which Dan talks about the Carthaginian solution for Berlin with Operation Paperclip, where you're seizing the enemy's scientists.
They're fighting over the Nazi scientists. They're trying to beat the Soviet Union to getting the Nazi scientists. That's fascinating, though, right? One of the things the reason that's so interesting to us is because information is so accessible nowadays.
Yep.
Archimedes would have put his plans on Twitter, and so it wouldn't have been that big a deal to get him.
But then it was the only guy who knew how to
do this. The only way
stuff.
to get his knowledge was to get him. Well, now he would have made a YouTube video, and everybody would have had it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably.
Maybe.
Probably.
Or you do what the Soviets did to their scientists: is you lock them up and nobody talks to them, and nobody sees them.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But I see him as like a.
But in America,
I see him as like a Steve Wozniak character who was going to give away the design plans for the Apple II for free. You know what I mean? Like that kind of guy.
In
he
America,
just wants people to know how to do this stuff.
Right.
You throw them in a think tank and give them a whole bunch of money and whatever the hell they want, and then they're happy to help. They're happy to think of things for you to do.
Well, exactly. But I'm just saying, like, nowadays information is so much cheaper.
Yeah, but I'm saying I don't think he'd have a YouTube channel.
Why wouldn't he?
Archimedes would totally have a YouTube channel nowadays.
No.
Chat.
No, he'd be in a think tank, locked away.
And you think that, but think about how much more impressive Archimedes would be when he could crowdsource everything. Okay, so anyway, you got a genius like Archimedes. If he's making YouTube videos where he can read the comments and see what some other really smart person who might also make YouTube videos would see that and be like, "Hey, have you tried this?"
Yeah. Or
who did Archimedes have to bounce those ideas off of?
Nobody.
Who did he have that was a peer? But because of the internet, really smart, specialized people can still talk to somebody else who knows the language for their field because of YouTube and because of Twitter and because of Facebook. And it allows us to supercharge our industry and everything. It's fascinating to think about.
And yet I think people are getting dumber.
But they're not.
I think they are.
That's the mistake. I like to joke because idiocracy feels true, but it's not. It's funny. It's not really true. People are not getting dumber. The same percentage of smart people are still born, and the more people you have, the more smart people you'll have. But there was always that same percentage of dumb people too. So the more people you have, the more dumb people you have.
Sure.
Right. And the internet gives those dumb people a way to have a voice. Right.
But if we asked Google, what percentage of people have looked up information about let's just say under 30, looked up information about the Kardashians compared to look up information on how to build a house.
Yeah, but I guarantee most of those are women.
It doesn't matter.
So back in the day, they would have still been doing that.
Fine, Jersey Shore.
They would have still been doing that. They would have been looking for gossip because that's traditionally something based on female competition that was important.
Or just entertainment in general.
Dude.
We'll just call it entertainment.
I didn't think about it like this until I was listening to a podcast with Rogan, and he had Mark Anderson on.
Okay.
The tech guy. And he's like, the more people we have, the more human brains we have. And that's the single best thing in the world. Like for innovation, that's the best resource. You think it's steel or microchips or any of that shit. It's not. It's human brain. So the more people you make, the more geniuses you're going to have because a certain percentage of humans are geniuses.
Sure.
So the trick is to just find those geniuses and harvest that resource by getting them to do great stuff.
Sure.
Right? Like that's the important thing.
That's what I know. That's what I mean by the think tanks.
Right, but it's not just think tanks. Nowadays they don't need a think tank. They can create a community and do it on YouTube.
True.
It's fascinating. The world is totally different. That information used to be the most expensive thing in the world.
That's
More
absolutely
expensive
correct.
than gold, more expensive than anything. And now it is so cheap. And that's amazing.
It's how you use the information.
Sure.
And if you use the information.
Sure. But now people have less barriers than at any time in history to get information.
Sure.
Absolutely.
It's not easy. And you got to weed through a bunch of bullshit, but it's there. And that is, if we can survive the weeding through the bullshit, all that nonsense, it's going to be great for humanity. But we have to build the defenses to survive the fakes. We have to build our innate trust of our eyesight. We have to learn to not trust that. And then the internet will again be a boon. That's the way I look at it. Anyway, this is way off topic.
Yeah, we've gone way into the woods like usual. Might get weird.
Actually, folks, honestly, this is what I love about anybody can sit here and recount the battles of Hannibal, but the conceptual stuff,
right, and we are not qualified anyway. Like all we're doing is recounting a recount we heard.
Yeah,
the primary sources.
I didn't either.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I listened to Dan.
But really, the extrapolation is my favorite thing about what you guys do. So this is what I'm here for,
and that's why we love having you here. Because you help. We help with that. It is, and it is. You're a big help with that. Okay, so let's just recap it quick, and then we can get to some points that I think are a little bit more important. Okay, so Hannibal basically is running around Italy for 15 years until Rome sends Scipio to Africa to attack Carthage, and Hannibal gets called back. Rome takes and wins a battle outside of Carthage, and Carthage surrenders on terms that were very favorable to Rome. And that's how the Second Punic War ends. Third Punic War happens because Carthage is building back so fast after the Second Punic War,
paying off their debts,
getting so rich that basically the Romans can't help themselves from wanting to take it. And so they end up, based on how Dan sees it anyway, they end up drumming up a reason to go to war with Carthage. And then they go and destroy Carthage. And Hannibal ends up on the run. He ends up, getting chased from city to city by Roman assassins. And then I don't think they ever catch him, if I remember correctly.
Doesn't he take poison?
They were right outside his door, and he committed suicide by taking the poison that he had concealed in his ring the whole time.
Right.
He's really lucky that poison worked.
Well.
Yeah, I think about that sometimes. Like, how long was that poison sitting in there? Can I? There's another little tiny point that I just want to jump into really quick.
Please.
So, the prevalence of poison in the ancient world cannot be underestimated.
Fascinating.
There's a great book called Mithridates, the Poison King, who was actually
I love Mithridates.
Yes. Mithridates. We should do an episode if you want to talk about him. There's a great book called Mithridates, the Poison King. It's all about this guy's life. Fascinating character. And he
a descendant of Alexander the Great, according to him.
Right. Yeah. And he specialized in poisons. And the same author wrote a book about poisons in the ancient world, especially about Greeks.
All right, Matt.
It's all
pin that.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay, we'll do an episode.
Right
you said, why don't we do this? In the Talking Hardcore chat group at Hardcore History Discussions, why don't you share that resource, and then we'll host a live discussion on the Discord channel that we'll record for the podcast feed.
Cool.
Where we discuss Mithridates. I want other people involved. It's not going to be like a book club event. Just share the resources, and we're just going to all chat. And I think I've been thinking about wanting to do that on the Discord feed anyway. I think that'd be fun, like a live meetup to talk about Mithridates and poison. I think that'd be fun, and then we'll share it on the feed sometime soon. You good with that, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right. So Carthage loses the first and second and third Punic Wars. At the end of the Third Punic War, Rome destroys Carthage completely. They sack the city, and basically, it's never the same again.
Yep. Well, it's destroyed.
And then Rome, this is what Dan gets into that I love about the Third Punic Nightmares podcast. Rome takes over Carthage, takes all its trade, and gets super rich, brings back all these slaves, and all of this inflush of cash completely changes the Roman temperament and changes the Roman character. They become completely different than the hard, tough people that won those wars. That's what I wanted to get to. That's the part that I find relevant to nowadays.
We
And I
talked
wanted to
about
talk
this
about
and
a little bit of the trivia. Yep.
something of the follow up to the Second World War. So, like how America was supposed to be a smaller country and it would have worked well as one, but then it won the Second World War and had this massive influx of cash and all this kind of stuff.
No, a little bit different. That's part of it, but
yeah,
I look at it as a little bit more comprehensive than that. All the money that came into this country from World War I and World War II, and all the power that came to this country after having nuclear weapons and winning World War II. Right.
And then, well, you can't stop there, because look at the influx of technology and creation that came after the loss of the Cold War. I mean, during the Cold War. I'm sorry.
Right.
I mean, innovation.
So
technology.
all of that change fundamentally switched the character of America as a nation. It might end up being for good. It might end up being for bad. We don't know. But it fundamentally changed America. And so Dan's point was that Hamilcar, he hypothesized that Hamilcar may have looked down and saw what happened to Rome in the next 100 years and kind of felt like Carthage got its revenge. Right? Like they had to change who they were. They were no longer the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic. And in the long run, he destroyed the Roman Republic through his son.
Why did he do that, though? So there's two things about America here, but not necessarily coinciding that I'm seeing. So Dan says that Rome besmirched her honor, and they did. They broke the treaties. You know what I mean? So that to me is America.
That's with the Third Punic War, when they destroyed Carthage for no good reason. They said, we won't invade. We won't invade. We won't. Yeah. If you do this, we won't destroy you.
And the people even cried out. They said, how you would do what no other person in history has done? You'll be a treaty breaker? That was huge things back then. Civilization was held together by honor. So that to me is comparable to America in Vietnam. Not for the same reason, breaking a treaty, but a case could be made that was our dirtiest war, where we lost our honor. That does not coincide with the truly noble crusade of the Second World War,
right?
From which America received all those resources about which you're speaking, that transformed its society and military spending and civilization, without the dirtiness of the former. So, we have. I don't know what that means, but that's
Matt,
just how I see it.
No, pause. All right, that's a great point. I didn't think about it like that. I understand how Vietnam happened and why it did and what caused it, because World War II was so crazy gloves off that it kind of just got these soldiers in the habit of fighting gloves off gnarly wars when we didn't used to do that, at least not all the time. And so Vietnam got nasty, and we did a lot of strategic bombing that went after civilians, because that's just what we did to end World War II. But we didn't used to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I disagree. And here's why I'm going to disagree. What you have is a similarity, at least in my opinion, between the U.S. and Vietnam against the communists and Israel versus versus Hamas. So there's collateral damage. And it's not that we're trying.
No.
You can't fight. No, hold on. The Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, they did not wear uniforms. It was all guerrilla tactics.
Scott,
so we were
doing carpet bombing. like what we did in World War II.
Sure.
That's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say that America gained all that wealth and everything that we talked about from a war like Rome against Carthage, but it wasn't an ignoble pursuit. Yeah, you're right, Scott. Like, or George, when we got into it and got down and dirty, we committed all the atrocities you ever want to hear about. You know what I mean?
There was a lot of atrocities committed by Americans.
We committed war crimes. But it wasn't. I think the intention there is what's important. I'm not going to totally forgive it by that, but it is. We're making.
I think what happened is we fell into this idea that that's just how war was going to be.
It was very much coming from a time of annihilation. Yeah, it was coming from.
But that was not a war of annihilation. Yeah, exactly.
No,
Vietnam didn't need to be, but you're right.
Yeah,
it didn't need to be, but we fought it like it was. But the Vietnamese didn't do the things the Nazis did or the Japanese
did. How
did.
we were accustomed to doing war because first.
But it was just like those people that were running that war were the people.
Yes.
That won World War II.
Yes.
And that's how they won it. So that's just how they did war.
Yeah.
Right,
which is understandable. Right. That's human nature. Fuck it. It's hard. I don't judge that historically. I don't condemn that. Like there's more
to the dirtiness of our part in Vietnam than just the bombing campaigns. There's a whole
absolutely. Absolutely there was bad things that happened.
What did
the My Lai massacre and all
what did this
intention being there?
What did his name say? He said, "Make it war as horrific as you want. Just make it quick."
Right.
Who said that?
No, that was one of the generals. Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, it just wasn't quick.
The best thing you could do is get it over with fast because it's going to be bad no matter what. In essence.
Well, and it's going to be worse the longer it goes.
But I think, Matt, what you could argue is all the money and everything that we brought into America. So to win World War II and World War I, we had to turn our industrialization up to 11. And then we had the banks loaning all the money to these European countries and all that wealth transfer to America. And maybe that propped us up to be what we have been for the last 30 years or 40 years. And then now we don't know what's going to happen. Rome got fat on Carthage, and Dan's point is that it eventually led to the downfall of the Roman Republic. What if we got fat on World War II cash and Cold War cash, and it eventually leads to our downfall as a republic?
I would look at the factors that cause that, and I'm seeing parallels. I'm glad to have made the distinctions that we did just earlier.
Sure.
But I think the principle is basically the same. So, like, basically, what happened to Rome is like, so there's two things. Besmirch their honor. There's actually three things, and I think it's a good point. It's something I wanted to talk about. So I'll just get to that first before I forget what I'm talking about. Dan talks about, he talks about that the threat of Hannibal was so great and unprecedented and scary in Roman times, at that time in the Republic, that it upped their already robust cultural training program to produce basically like sociopath politicians. Okay.
Right.
They turned it up to 11. They're like, we need somebody who can defend against that. Like, look at us. Our consuls got killed in the field. Our dictator didn't do his job. Like,
we need the best.
We need to develop noblemen who are able to just rise up and handle both the dictator aspect of it and the military field aspect and the politician aspect of it. Like, all that stuff. That literally was Julius Caesar.
Well, okay.
Yeah, or Marius.
Can I throw a little caveat in here?
Sure.
You guys can say that's where Rome besmirched their honor, and the U.S. may have done that in Vietnam, but we've tried to rectify that as well.
100%.
So it's not like we continue to do the Roman method.
You're right,
and I think that's the huge difference here.
Well, that's why that's not the part that I'm focusing on.
Okay.
I just think when you go and you win wars like Rome did with Carthage or we did with World War I and World War II, it changes the country.
Sure. But
America's unrecognizable that it was 60 years ago.
But I don't think
70 years ago.
I don't think that's what's changed it.
Oh, I think there's no argument that World War II is what changed America, except maybe the Cold War.
I think the
look
Cold
at-
War is what changed America.
And,
the
and
most.
to be clear, we only had the Cold War because we had the Russians as a supposed adversary or leftovers
Well, I
from the
think
Second
that's
World War.
see, I think the
supposed fucking commie.
Okay.
You fucking
commie. So
I think
what I'm
you just
saying by
said
that,
supposed.
by that is that having an enemy is a good reason for spending money on your military, and we
Yep.
definitely, whether the threat was okay,
Yeah, we put
Whether the
military bases all over the world.
and having an opponent who was built up to be as great as we were, and who was diametrically opposed to us ideologically, was a great way for people to write checks for military spending during the Cold War, which was that buildup
Right.
you're talking about. Now,
But-
was Russia a
but-
threat? Sure. Military they could have occupied all the way to
in the Atlantic.
the Atlantic Ocean if we had not moved in from the west, right? Right. So, and Stalin 100% would have done that had he been the one who liberated France and all these other countries in the
If
west.
he had
right?
the ability, if we weren't there, he would have
absolutely
done
right.
it.
So, but in the east, they still occupied every country they took over, right? So we didn't do that. You know what I mean? So
No.
they
No, in
were
fact,
a
what we
they
did
were
is
a
we took
threat.
a
They
lot
were a
of that
legitimate.
money.
They were a legitimate threat in that regard, but as how much it affected American society, greatly built up, overspent on, and bankrupted them.
Industrialized the hell out of it very quickly.
There's a two-edged sword, with each of which did not cut but healed. So we got the military spending, and they, and we bankrupted them by making them spend as much money as we were spending on them. That was brilliant strategy.
Absolutely. But look at the change in American society. In 1920, look at how many people had running water, indoor plumbing. And then look at it in 1950. It's shocking. Yeah, it's fucking shocking.
I'm fine with all.
No, that's great.
Like,
it's just something like I love it. I'm not anti-modernization, but I'm just saying that level of change.
Yeah.
Dealing with that level of change that fast is difficult.
Oh, good point.
Right, it's difficult, and it has reverberations that echo down the ages.
I think. Do you?
And
think
we're doing the
that's where
same
we all
thing now.
Came to expect, because I'm thinking about the middle class in that situation. I'm saying how a middle class was established that was comfortable enough financially to buy a house, own 2 cars, your wife,
right? Because they were making tanks and planes and then cars.
Raise the children, whatever you want to do, honey.
Well,
I got you.
For the first time in history,
and that is just. Without the immediate benefit of that, the benefit of that to me is really the education factor for the children that they're raising. It's creating a better generation because the opportunities for those children are so much more expansive. A solid middle class is very important for American society because the next generation has to be smart, educated, experienced, and we provided that for a long time.
Yeah, but I have to ask. I have to. What I'd like you and a lot of people that say these things kind of look at, and I hate to use this as a reference, but look at like the Christmas Story. Okay, this guy, the kid's dad worked. They didn't have a lavish household. He had a car. But he kept, he was I forgot what was the kid's name. Anyway, Ralphie was always talking about, when he was helping his dad change a tire, and his dad had patched that tire more times. To the point where that's all that was holding the tire together with all the patches he put on. So when a lot of people look at, or when they say, life in the 1950s or the 1960s, you were able to afford more. I think more people were also a little better with their money. And I think money was still tight, even though, we have this glorification of the past, at least of the middle class in the 1950s and 60s. I just think there's a glorification that's unjust.
I think what you need to think about
to a certain degree, absolutely.
What you need to think about is that middle class was historically unique.
Sure.
Think about historically. When was there ever a large middle class?
I don't know. I don't know enough about.
I would argue that
geopolitical,
probably almost never.
You never know.
Almost never. The world, until just in the last 500 years, almost everybody was poor. And the only reason people aren't poor now is because of mostly because of Western institutions and systems of government.
But it depends on what your definition of poor is.
No, the definition of poor. everybody was poor except the royalty, or the aristocracy. So 99% of people were poor forever because they had to farm. Because 90% of people had to farm just to be able to have everybody eat. Right. Until we had more industrialization and we had good governance and we had Western types of government and Western types of economy, people were just poor.
Yeah, but there's a difference.
So middle class is new.
It's what I'm saying is you have a difference between, okay, there's poverty, there's poor, and you can say middle class. A lot of people, I mean, look, even historically, people in the middle class are still struggling. They're still living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
So what?
But they're living where they're not food insecure.
Sure.
That's a big effing difference.
We're not living where we're food insecure, but one major medical issue,
that's
and you're
that's the
bankrupt.
American medical establishment. That's a whole other deal.
Yeah, but I mean,
that's not just American medical establishment. That's also
my friend lives in what? No, in other
the,
countries, you pay a lot of taxes, but you get taken care of.
But do you know? Were you there?
I think.
Or do you only know what the glorification is telling?
Well, I don't think of it as a glorification, Sky. I don't only listen to the positives. There was lots of negatives about the 50s and 60s.
Sure.
You realize that when people hark back to the golden age of America, most people don't think the 50s and 60s. You know when they think?
No.
The 80s.
Okay.
Reagan was pumping up everything. They were winning the Cold War. Everybody was doing great. There was no Vietnam to fight over. There wasn't massive protests. The 60s had riots and chaos. Nobody's talking about that when they say, when MAGA people say make America great again, they're not talking about segregation like the Democrats imply they are. They're talking about the 80s when people all just thought all the races were now getting along. Everything was cool. And there was a strong middle class and everybody was doing pretty good. That's what they're talking about.
Except
late 80s, early 90s.
I was thinking early 80s because when you have record inflation and record interest rates.
The Reagan years when he was really there, late 80s, early 90s, when we were young, and people think back of that as the golden age because people always think back to the time of their childhood as the golden age.
But then you can talk to my uncle who is in the 70s now, says that the 50s and 60s were the golden age.
Right. But I guess that's kind of off the topic. My point was there was war, and Dan talks about this in Blueprint for Armageddon. The loans that New York banks made to Europe for World War I were not even paid off in 2006.
Yeah,
they were still paying. Europe spent hundreds of years building up wealth from all their colonies.
Yep.
And then spent 2 world wars transferring it to the United States.
True.
Okay. The question is, did that change us like Rome beating Carthage did?
I don't think so.
I think it's quite wanted to dig into look at how rich we are.
I think it did. And I wanted to examine the reasons why it changed Rome, just so we can differentiate, so we can actually predict the future based on So there was this, slavery and spoiling their honor thing we talked about. I think America received the same didn't have those. Okay, so that's different. Whatever it means, I don't know what that means. I just want to think about it. The second thing is we were truly going. So there was a dispute between previously friendly nations a generation ago. Now you're going to wipe this nation out. Is that a noble cause? It was even tricked into being built up. Look how good they're doing. Let's go fight them. We can take their stuff. That was the reason Rome went to war, destroyed Carthage. That's what, you know what I mean? That's not a good reason. That's not a good. We didn't go to
the Senate floor and say these are only 300 miles or 30 miles from us and Carthage. Yep.
Which said 2 things. Look how close this prosperous nation is to us. They are still a threat, possibly, and we could go take their stuff. So that is not a good reason. That is not a good reason to go to war. You know what I mean?
I guess it all depends, Matt. I don't look at history and judge that way. It may have been, it may not have been. Who knows?
I'm just saying that's not compared to our efforts in Europe in the Second World War. So that is a difference as well. So we did change because of that, and we
Right.
received all the benefits, but our circumstances were different. And I just want to take
Absolutely.
I
Different
literally,
circumstances. That's a good point.
So what we're trying to do is right now is predict the future of our country based on history, and that. So we need to examine the exact things that happened in the.
I guess that's not even what I was talking about when I wanted to bring this point up.
Oh, okay.
My only thought, the reason I was bringing this up is because there's a chance that this American society that we're living in post World War II is a bubble. And it's a bubble created by the money and influx from World War I and World War II. And it's not sustainable. And America is going to, once that bubble pops, everything will be different. And I might be wrong.
But I'm going to tell you why.
Because our technology advantage might actually have dispelled that bubble.
Well,
I don't know.
I'm going to tell you why I disagree.
Sure, fire away. I'd like to be wrong.
I'm gonna quote Warren Buffett here.
Mm-hmm.
Never bet against America.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's a great point.
The other thing I wanted to drop is not just technologically, George. Name one other country people are actively leaving to go to for a better life,
and have been for the last 200 years.
Yeah,
I mean that's gonna be any first world nation
point.
bordering
maybe, but not like
nation.
America.
But originally, yes, we were the spirit of democracy, and you guys said it best in your July 4th episode. I forget who said it. I think it was Scott. But it
if it was really smart,
but it was, I think. But there you go. So one of you said, I think it was you, George.
No, it's probably Scott.
Okay, no. I'm just saying. I think it really was. Dick. Is it? I think America has been a net positive for the world because democracy spread like wildfire, and we've been a force for inspiration against tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
That's George for sure.
True.
That's not me.
But then all the influx of cash created the military-industrial complex, which kind of led us astray from those values. So all of that money kind of changed America at its core, but without the branding change. We still brand ourselves as those values.
Sure.
But we also interfere in elections and try to, like you talk about with Ukraine. We've done lots of terrible shit that were completely un-American.
To benefit us.
To benefit the military-industrial complex. And maybe that benefits all of us and maybe it doesn't. I think there's an argument to be made either way there. But that's why we did those things.
So America patrols the seas to protect the world's trade, and you need ships and planes to do that. But other than that, we have been greatly, over.
Yeah, like why are we screwing around in South American elections?
Our foreign,
like
yeah, exactly, right. Yeah,
but the threat of the Cold War and all the money we made from all the other wars allowed us to create this giant military-industrial complex, which very much has its positives. But it also has its drawbacks because they're going to want to shoot the guns. They're going to want to use the bombs. What good does it have to have a big stockpile of bombs if you don't ever drop them on anybody? Then you don't need to make new ones. So that's part of it.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying about previously with, we're right now we're selling all of our old stuff to.
Right, but I'm just saying and so if we're selling all our old stuff to Ukraine, then
in Israel and
so
other places.
Part of the reason that we may have had foreign policies that led to those wars was so that we could sell them our old munitions
and make new stuff.
Maybe.
And keep the best stuff for us.
Maybe. So maybe it's a net positive for Americans and maybe it's not. We won't know. We can't know.
Yeah. So my primary benefit of all that has always been the middle class, literally for the reasons I spoke of. A better generation, a better future generation makes for a better country. It's education. So we had that for a while, but I think, George, you said, are we on the tip of a decline? As far as the middle class is concerned, I'm not going to say fully yes because I am technically middle class and I literally have a 5-bedroom house that I pay for by myself and I live alone. My cat doesn't earn money. She catches mice really good, but I also catch rats. I also catch rats for a living, and I literally am a pest control guy, and I have a good life. Okay, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So but there was more. I think there was more to that with the other situation because things are expensive nowadays. Okay,
Dude,
you know what I mean?
I think the American dream is alive. You're right.
But I think the middle class, as we think of it, as holding down a family. I couldn't pay for 2 kids and a wife right now. I could not do that. Dude.
No,
You know what
your
I mean?
wife would have to work.
Right.
And by
exactly.
the way, if you're interested, Matt is in the market for a wife. Hit him up. Hit him up at the Hardcore History Discussions Discord channel. If you're a lady and you're interested, he's a
me and my cat
author.
live a bachelor life.
I'm just saying he's an author working on some great projects. He brings a lot to the table, ladies.
That's messed up, George.
Why?
I'm not saying
travel
Europe. Don't take any
You
offense
got
to that.
lying?
No.
You call me a liar?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Listen, Matt's going to be a famous author one day, and a smart lady will get in on the ground floor. That's all I'm saying. All right, you want to buy low and sell high. Now's the time. If you're wanting to get in on the Matt stock, now's the time, because he's going to be a famous author someday. So trust me, I've read his stuff. It's good.
That's true.
It's good. All right, it's going to get published someday. It's too good not to. So if you're a lady. Get in while he's a pest control guy and not a famous author. That's all I'm saying.
He's right. Yeah, he's right.
It's easier. That's simple economics.
This is the time to invest
When you
in
buy
Matthew Bellah.
when you buy a stock, what do? Do you like to buy when it's high and sell when it's low? Of course not. You buy low and you sell high.
Yeah, but that
the first woman who's willing to watch me come home from work and dump it and change my and handle a bunch of dead rats that I collected that day.
Right now, Matt. I just made a great pitch.
I'm willing to marry, and you will be a millionaire someday.
Matt, stop. I just made a great pitch. Let's leave it there. Let's not ruin it.
No. Right? Let's be real. No.
We don't want to be real. That's not what salesmen do. Salesmen don't tell you the truth, Matt. They tell you a part of the truth.
They tell you what you want to hear.
They tell you part of the truth. A good salesman tells you enough of the truth.
What you want to hear, audience, is that my plan is to travel Europe until I find a woman with whom I fall in love and settle down.
So he's taking applications.
By the way,
hit him up. Hardcore History Discussions Discord channel. Anyway, I think that's enough, guys. I think we need to call it. It's 11:40 our time.
Been fun.
This has been fun. We're going on an hour and a half discussion. Everybody, thanks for tuning in.
Jesus,
this is just the tip of the iceberg for this kind of discussion.
Can I make a conclusion?
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Don't fuck with Rome.
That is a great moral for a long time. Now I don't think it's as big a deal. I think now you can fuck with Rome.
I don't think it was as big of a deal as of the 800s.
Right, but
okay.
Well, no,
in its heyday, right?
Oh,
no,
dude. Crazy.
Hannibal was literally
giant wars and still not caved.
Yeah.
Shows you how crazy those motherfuckers
the most
were.
Brilliant general that possibly could have been thrown against that superpower, and they won.
They still survived. It's almost like they just survived that second Punic Wars.
That's why he screwed up. He should have went for the
all that matters. Maybe. As long as your people and your culture survive, you are that winner.
Those crazy eye ties, right?
They should have just went.
They were nuts. They were nuts.
They should have cut the head off.
Who the hell would just start arming their slaves and children and old men instead of just saying, okay, let's have a peace?
Wait a minute.
Wait
a minute. Who says the slaves would have fought?
Well, that's what they were doing, though.
Who says the slaves would have been like,
well, because
you know what? Screw you guys. We're not fighting Hannibal. We're going to fight against you.
It was a little different back then. The slaves were a little bit more like family members sometimes.
God, a lot of these people. That for a second.
It's a good point, though. A lot of people might have rebelled against their masters had Hannibal literally besieged Rome in that moment. They'd be like, this is over. We're just killing our masters. That could have turned. Right. Wow.
There's also a lot of times in Roman history. Baby. Well, there's a lot of times in Roman history where the slaves were close to their masters.
Maybe. Sure.
I mean,
yeah,
like,
yeah, there were some like the scholars and stuff who were treated well, you know what I mean, but not the
there
field
was
hands.
educated slaves. That's what Cicero was talking
Yeah.
about. Like,
Right.
I know.
So a very
the
small
Germans-
minority of the
but
slaves
Germans,
might not have killed
but
their
like
masters.
Cicero was talking about how I think it was the Germans who had no value because they couldn't be taught to read.
Yeah.
All right. So, like, who would want those slaves? He wanted slaves that could read and be intelligent.
Sure. That was Cicero.
So that
Yeah,
was one guy.
exactly.
He had a lot of slaves.
No,
but,
no. Yeah, I'm just saying.
And to be clear,
There was
those
all
were the
kinds of
ones.
different things.
Those were, but you're right, George. Those were the
And I
slaves
think
who
they
were
were
being armed.
promising the slaves their
Those-
freedom if they fought
Right,
against Carthage.
and just to be clear, I want to reiterate: those were the slaves who were being armed, the trusted ones, the educated ones. Not
Yeah,
the
they
field-
weren't
so
giving
my,
it to
my,
every
my
Tom,
bad.
Dick, and
Yeah,
Harry.
right.
Yeah, but
right,
that
right.
doesn't make those slaves.
And Dan,
that doesn't
and
mean
Dan,
those
Dan
slaves
even
would have
says
been
that
good
it was a
warriors.
small amount of the slaves in this. No, it doesn't. But to George's point,
That's
it was
the point,
desperation.
right?
Yeah,
That's the point.
Those slaves would not have rebelled against their masters.
Right, but I
Oh,
think you're right, dude. Like he probably could have took Rome.
I think
But
you
we'll
could.
never know. And my
I don't
thought
think
is,
so. Based on
the
that,
only
no,
thing
I
is
don't.
I'm
I still
thinking-
no. That's false. No, we just
Matt,
disproved that.
maybe.
I
But
don't.
my
I don't think
point is,
Hannibal could have taken
He's
Rome
a
in that moment.
genius. I default to his judgment at the time.
What?
I just do. I don't
Okay,
know. I don't see how we
Yeah.
could possibly have
I
enough
see him.
facts to know
I
if he
yeah,
could have
I
done
think
it or not.
I think about him in that moment because Dan talks about this and he leads the episodes off with it. He's
Mhm.
like, "What if Rome never existed? No Christianity, no Crusades, like all this stuff." And it's all
man,
on the
crazy.
all on the turn of that one moment. The thoughts of this one man in the field. He just defeated the Roman army at Cannae, and he's just like, "No, I won't go invade Rome for
Man, you're
reasons."
such a
He
heathen,
did-
though.
Wait a minute. What if Hitler would have destroyed Moscow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's one of the
It's-
other major turning points in human history.
The
point
I
is-
said on the podcast too.
I know, but I just
The
keep
point- the
thinking
point-
like
I
that's
think of-
where
I think of
Hannibal
it-
screwed up.
I think
Yeah,
you're
I think-
probably
I think-
right, but I can see why people think it might not be. So there was
I
always
think
this
of it.
narrative in
Mhm.
human history that yes, he messed up then, and then now there's the counter narrative that we're like, oh no, he didn't take it. If you look at these factors, and I think the real answer is, how could we possibly know?
We don't.
I see it in the context of Hitler taking Moscow as well, Scott, and like so. Why was Hitler? Was Hitler able to take Moscow? Yeah, he probably. Maybe the resistance of the people at the time was a major factor, but maybe he could. Could Hannibal have taken Rome? I don't think he could have. Hitler had a huge army fresh from the field. That was their first drive. Hitler had been, or Hannibal had been in the field for 3 years prior to that. Okay, his men were not only the individualistic fighters with tribal allegiances back home that we talked about. They had supply issues, and they had to supply them. So they were getting zero support from their government overseas, and they were not siege warfare specialists. They would have been a protracted siege, and all the allies were surrounding them. So there's a hugely different situation, man. Like I think again, factors are important.
Go for broke, baby. Adam went for broke.
Right.
He followed the right strategy. He went to Italy. He went to Italy. His perspective was Rome isn't even that important. He just cast it aside, and he went for the alliance network.
What
and I
we
think
know
that
in
was
hindsight-
the right strategy.
But what we do know in hindsight is that his overall strategy ended up not working.
Well,
Well,
because
that's
the
why
Romans
it
were just
opens up-
never going to give up anyways. Like
Maybe.
I think
Maybe.
the
But
question is,
that's what opens up the chance of all
the
this
question-
secondhand mighty quarterback.
well,
it's- we're never gonna
question is,
say that.
would
Wait a
it
minute.
have happened anyways? You know what I mean?
Rome,
So like,
you're saying Rome would have never given up? Well, if there's no Romans left,
Yeah,
there's nobody left to give up.
right.
It's over.
If he just raises
what
the
is
city.
a Roman? Is a Roman the
But
now?
if he raises the city
the
when they have no
allegiances-
army,
There are
and he
plenty of
builds-
Roman citizens and literal like Romans living in places like Pompeii
Less
and there are
than.
other cities close to
but
Rome.
less
Their culture and their bloodline would have lived on.
less
Maybe.
than though, right? Rome wasn't
Right,
really
right.
Rome before the end of the Carthage.
And then the
before end of
allies
the
go in and
war.
take the city back.
Maybe they all go, fuck yes,
Maybe.
they're gone, and now we'll be our own thing.
And they have their own little wars.
So now they are now they are
arguments-
to be clear, now they are a colony of Carthage, and can
I don't know. Or he
does-
burns the
no,
city to
no,
the
no,
ground,
no.
or he burns.
well,
I don't know.
Okay, Okay, then they wouldn't have like not he couldn't have burned down the entire Alliance network. Like they would have rebelled against
But
him.
he could
No,
have
no.
burned down the city.
Once they
Yeah,
found
he
out he
can-
was a tyrant, but the government of Carthage now claims all this land. You know what I mean? Okay,
Yeah.
so now does
Oh, yeah.
Hannibal now rule over it as a king, or does he just leave? Who's
No.
occupying that territory? All the tribal people
Fascinating.
go home,
That's
or they're
fascinating.
being
Who
ruled by
knows?
tribal people. Like
And
who's ruling
Matt,
Rome at this point?
But Matt, that is fascinating. What ifs? And who
Install a
knows?
puppet government?
Or
Well, who knows?
or Matt.
And
Nobody,
eventually-
nobody rules Rome because he destroys it, loots it,
Okay,
and
then
leaves.
all the ally cities are still there, right?
Yeah, but
You know what I
maybe
mean?
they don't have any beef with Carthage.
Or they fight
What-
amongst each other.
I don't
because,
know. That's the point.
because they just
But
destroyed
Matt,
Rome
Scott's
and
point
killed
is
all these
that
people's families.
There's too many variables. That's
I
why
love
think
talking
it's-
about this
it's
stuff.
fun to discuss these what ifs, but you can't have a right or wrong answer.
Right.
'Cause
So
we'll never be able
Hannibal
to
was so for your conclusion,
Like I said, I
Hannibal
default-
Hannibal was not wrong in not invading Rome.
I can't say he was
Or-
wrong, but Scott
okay,
does. I
good.
can't say he's wrong. I can't say he was right.
I say he's wrong.
I think I default to the people on
Why-
the ground at the time.
Scott, can you
because
break it
she
down
had
for
way
us?
more
You think he
information
should
than
have
we
just
had.
driven straight from Moscow? Like,
Yeah.
conditions
No,
are
but I
different.
think we got to wrap this up, guys.
It is getting late.
Well, we're not really making any headway on this point anyway, because I think that you both have good points.
I think all the Hannibal
real
geeks are with
interest-
us.
We'll never know.
Well, you know what? I maybe they'll have like an alternative time simulator.
Still wouldn't know.
Well, hold on. Maybe they'll have an alternative time simulator in the future where you can actually like play historical events as like Hannibal against the Romans.
Still wouldn't know.
Well, maybe.
You still would know
Yeah.
because that's only going to be subject to the variables that you input into the computer.
Yeah, that's
Just like
true.
any other model.
That's true.
And none of those are going to be, that model wouldn't be as smart as Hannibal was at the time.
It's like,
But smart guys can make mistakes too. Geniuses fuck up. So who knows?
well, it's like you had that. Well, there was an old
So,
TV show called
and-
like. Anyway,
Anyway, okay. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Check out the discussion more on this topic. Go to the Talking Hardcore chat in the Hardcore History Discussions Discord page and tell us if you think Hannibal was wrong to not go for Rome. And
Team Hannibal.
argue with Matt if you think he was,
argue with me.
and argue with Scott if you think he wasn't.
If I don't answer, I'm sorry.
Just keep tagging him and telling him, "Hey, what are you afraid to talk to me?" Eventually, he'll get goaded into jumping on there. He's a little busy.
I don't
Thank
care if
everybody.
you hear this episode 2 years from now. Like, still hit me up about that. I'll talk
Yeah,
to you fairly.
100%. It's never going to not be interesting.
Well, the Discord will still be there.
Yeah, and it's never going to not be interesting, Matt. So check that out. At again,
And then George, you
in
meant
the Hardcore History Discussion Discord.
hardcore history discussion
Link
Discord
in the
is
description.
it's fun. And then George, you wanted to set that event for the Mithridates discussion. You wanna
Yes.
talk more about
And so that's the other thing I was going to say. Thank you, Matt. I forgot about that. We are going to
Straight
do
up, G.
a discussion live on Discord about Mithridates. Here, probably we'll do it in 2 or 3 weeks to give everybody time to listen to this. And then just jump on. You don't have to have your camera on, and we're just going to record it and we'll throw it up on the feed as a podcast episode. But we want, come in, give your thoughts. Matt, I think I'm going to toss the ball to Matt to kind of lead that since he's done
got
a
it.
lot of reading on this. So Scott and I will just jump into with our thoughts and we'll go from there. I think I want to do more of those ideas where we have more of meetups on the Discord channel because it's more fun. Let's add more people into this and get more ideas. Again, the human brain is the greatest resource on earth.
Straight up. And
And the more
Archimedes
people
would
we
have
can
totally
help-
had a YouTube channel.
He would have had a Discord channel too. He would have also been looking at all. Anyway,
I
okay.
disagree.
All right. Well, also go on the Discord channel and tell Scott he's wrong. Thank you guys.
Have a good
Thanks
night.
for tuning in. Everybody have a good night. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Peace out.
Peace.